On July 2, 2025, Patrice Lumumba would have turned 100. Maybe he would have been a retired elder statesman, living quietly in a Congo he helped shape, free, strong, and sovereign. But that future was stolen from him. Because on January 17, 1962, Lumumba was murdered in one of the most brutal and shameful assassinations of the 20th century. He was beaten, shot, and then his body dissolved in acid, erased, as if history could be rewritten. But history doesn't forget, and neither do the people of Congo. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is that the world knows the truth. Belgium orchestrated the assassination. The United States gave its blessing. The United Nations stood by in silence. And for more than 6 decades, justice has been denied. Apologies have been whispered. Documents have been declassified. But no one has truly been held accountable. Until now. A recent report has shaken old ground. A 92-year-old former Belgian official, long suspected of involvement in Lumumba's murder, may finally be prosecuted. After all these years, the wheels of justice are slowly turning. But the question remains, will they stop before they crush the truth or finally bring it to light? Could this be the moment when justice, long delayed, is no longer denied? We're about to find out. In 2011, 50 years after their father's brutal assassination, Patrice Lumumba's children made a bold move. They filed a formal complaint in Belgium, demanding justice, not just for a man, but for a nation that was robbed of its future. 10 Belgian officials were named in the case, 10 men tied to the crime, and yet, not a single one faced prosecution. Today, only one of them is still alive. His name is Etienne d'Avignon, a 92-year-old former Belgian official. Back in 1961, he was just a trainee diplomat, but later, he rose to become vice chairman of the European Commission. And now, decades later, his name is once again in the spotlight. The Belgian prosecutor's office claims he was directly involved in Lumumba's unlawful detention and transfer, the first steps that led to his horrific execution. A court hearing has been scheduled for January 2026. Its purpose? To decide whether d'Avignon, now nearly 93 and nearing the end of his life, should finally stand trial. But as time ticks on, many are asking the same question. Will justice come before death does? The truth is, Etienne d'Avignon may never make it to trial. At 92 years old, his days are numbered. Heart failure, complications of old age. One quiet morning, he might slip away before the court ever opens. And if that happens, the last thread of accountability for Lumumba's assassination could vanish with him, just like that. But for Lumumba's daughter Juliana, this moment, this possible trial, is a flicker of hope. She welcomed the news with quiet strength, saying, "We're moving in the right direction. What we're seeking is, first and foremost, the truth." For over 60 years, Juliana Lumumba has carried questions that never found answers. Who killed her father? What role did the Americans play? And the United Nations? Why did they do nothing while he was being hunted, even under their supposed protection? The world pretended not to know, but we do. Patrice Lumumba was born in 1925 in the Kasai province of Congo. Even as a young boy, he stood out. He wasn't afraid to challenge his teachers or speak his mind. He saw the world as it was and questioned why it had to stay that way. In the mid-1940s, he left his village and moved to Stanleyville. His goal? To carve out a place in the Belgian Congo's emerging black middle class. But Lumumba wasn't content to blend in. He became deeply involved in civic life, rising quickly. By the early 1950s, he had already held leadership positions in 7 major organizations across the city. It was during this time that he began to push for African rights, not with fists or fire, but with words. Calm, respectful, deliberate. He called for racial equality. He demanded better education for Congolese children. In 1952, he wrote, "We promise docility, loyal and sincere collaboration to all those who want to help us achieve, in union with them, the element that is beyond us, civilization." But even then, the system was already turning against him, because they knew, sooner or later, he wouldn't just ask for change, he would fight for it. In the beginning, the Belgian colonial officers saw Patrice Lumumba as different, polite, measured, even respectful. His calm tone and careful words made him seem harmless, someone they could work with. But that changed. After being imprisoned for allegedly embezzling money from the postal service, something in Lumumba hardened. He had seen the inside of the colonial machine, and when he came out, he was no longer interested in being polite. He spoke louder, sharper. He called for the Congo to break free from the chains of paternalism. And across Africa, his voice was echoed by millions. Because the winds of change were already blowing. Colonies were rising, protests were spreading. The world was beginning to shift. And then, finally, on June 30th, 1960, history cracked open. Lumumba, leading the Congolese national movement, helped secure Congo's independence from Belgium. A new government was formed. Joseph Kasavubu was named head of state, and Patrice Lumumba became the country's first prime minister. It should have been a day of peace, of celebration. But what happened next would shake the world, because Lumumba stepped up to the podium and delivered a speech so bold, so unfiltered, that it sent shockwaves through every Western capital. He didn't thank Belgium for its civilizing mission. He exposed the cruelty, the humiliation, the exploitation. He spoke not just for Congo, but for every African still living under the boot of empire. And in that moment, the West made up its mind. Patrice Lumumba wasn't a partner. He was a threat. The independence ceremony was meant to be symbolic, diplomatic smiles, handshakes, and a peaceful transfer of power. But then King Baudouin of Belgium took the stage. His speech dripped with colonial arrogance. He praised the so-called civilizing mission of Belgium and ended with a condescending jab. "It is now up to you, gentlemen, to show that we were right to trust you." It was an insult, a reminder of who had ruled, and he expected silence in return. But Patrice Lumumba didn't stay silent. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't play nice. He didn't smooth things over. Instead, he turned to his people and to the world and told the truth. He spoke of the daily humiliation suffered by Black Congolese, of the beatings, the killings, of the wealth stripped from the land while his people starved. And then, with fire in his voice, he declared, "We who suffered in our bodies and hearts from colonialist oppression, we say to you out loud, from now on, all that is over." That sentence hit like a thunderclap. Lumumba didn't just demand freedom, he promised democracy, he vowed prosperity, and he warned foreign powers. Congo's minerals would no longer be theirs to steal. That speech, unapologetic and raw, changed everything. From that moment, the Belgians knew they would never control Congo under Lumumba's leadership. And while no one can say if the plan to assassinate him began that day, one thing is certain: the seeds of his downfall were planted in that room. The West was watching, and they were not pleased, because Lumumba had committed the greatest sin of all in their eyes. He told the truth, and he told it out loud. You see, the joy of independence didn't last long. Just days after Congo declared its freedom, chaos erupted from within. The Congolese army, made up mostly of African soldiers, rose in open mutiny. The reason? Despite independence, nothing had changed in the military ranks. They were still being commanded by the same brutal Belgian officer, Emile Janssens. Under Janssens, Congolese soldiers were treated as inferior. They did the same work as their white Belgian counterparts, but were never promoted beyond first sergeant major. No Congolese officer was allowed to lead. Their pay was meager, their dignity non-existent. And then Janssens made everything worse. In a stunning act of arrogance, he gathered his men, walked up to a blackboard, and wrote 6 words in chalk. "Before independence equals after independence." It was a slap in the face, a cruel reminder that, in their eyes, Congo's freedom was only on paper. The soldiers snapped. Riots broke out across the ranks. Enraged Congolese troops turned on Belgian officers, attacking anyone in uniform who stood in their way. White soldiers were hunted down. Panic spread. And within days, the violence had reached the capital. The new Congolese government, barely standing, barely organized, was suddenly caught in the middle of an exploding military rebellion. The same soldiers who had once celebrated Lumumba were now rioting in the streets. The country was slipping into chaos, and foreign eyes were watching closely. Because where there is instability, there is opportunity. And for Belgium and the United States, Congo's chaos was the perfect opening to make their move. Meanwhile, far from the capital, in the mineral-rich province of Katanga, a dangerous betrayal was brewing. At the center of it was a man named Moise Tshombe. Katanga had long been the jewel of Belgian colonialism, overflowing with copper, cobalt, and uranium. During the colonial era, Belgian settlers built empires there, exploiting the land with the help of powerful local families. One of those families was Tshombe's. Tshombe didn't just cooperate with the Belgians, he aligned himself with them deeply. His family had grown wealthy under colonial rule, and according to multiple reports, they absorbed not just the wealth, but also the racism. They inherited the Belgian disdain for other Congolese. Tshombe was a man of two faces. On one hand, he was Congolese by birth. On the other, he dressed in tailored foreign suits, stashed money in overseas accounts, and spoke the language of colonizers. He wasn't fighting for Congo. He was fighting for his place at the table. And behind closed doors, Tshombe resented Lumumba. He didn't believe in a united Congo. He didn't share the dream of independence for all. He saw the rest of the country, and especially Lumumba's supporters, as outsiders. Many in Katanga did. They looked down on the laborers who came from other provinces to work the mines. They feared losing their privileged place. In the 1960 election, Lumumba's party won national power. But in Katanga, 0 seats, not a single victory. It was a clear signal. Katanga had no love for Lumumba, no loyalty to the new Congo. And Tshombe, backed by Belgian business interests and powerful foreign allies, was already planning the ultimate betrayal. He didn't just want to break away, he wanted to take Congo's wealth with him. But Tshombe's biggest fear wasn't just losing influence, it was losing the money. Under Lumumba's leadership, the new Congolese state was expected to take full control of its vast mineral wealth, and Katanga's riches, mines filled with copper, cobalt, and uranium, were no longer guaranteed to benefit Belgian companies or the local elites who served them. So Tshombe made a choice. He allied himself with the Belgians. When Belgian troops landed in Congo under the pretext of protecting their citizens from the mutinous Congolese army, it was Tshombe who opened the gates of Katanga. He welcomed them, not as foreign invaders, but as old friends. And then he crossed the line. He declared Katanga an independent state. Just weeks after Congo gained its freedom, it was already falling apart. Tshombe's secession shattered the fragile unity of the nation, and the cracks widened fast. Another province, South Kasai, threatened to break away too. By July 1960, the situation was spiraling. Every day brought a new crisis. In the coastal city of Matadi, Belgian paratroopers stormed in, armed to the teeth, claiming to protect Belgian citizens. But what they were really doing was occupying key territory, pushing back the Congolese army in brutal street battles. Meanwhile, in Katanga, Belgian forces began advancing toward the capital. They didn't hide their intentions. They seized airfields. They set up blockades. They issued direct orders to the Congolese Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, about where he could and could not go. A foreign army, giving orders to an elected African leader on Congolese soil. The illusion of independence was crumbling, and Lumumba, he was trapped in a country he no longer fully controlled, surrounded by betrayal, hemmed in by foreign troops, watched constantly by those who feared his power. Congo was a nation on fire, and the West was pouring gasoline. At first, Lumumba still believed in diplomacy. In the face of rebellion and foreign interference, he turned to the United Nations for help. He requested international troops to restore order, hoping they would stand with Congo's legitimate government and crush the secessionist threat in Katanga. The UN responded, but not in the way he expected. When the UN peacekeeping force arrived, they bypassed the capital entirely. They didn't meet with Lumumba. Instead, they went straight to Katanga, straight to Tshombe. They made contact with the leader of the breakaway province, effectively legitimizing his regime, and did nothing to stop the Belgian troops backing him. They refused to intervene, refused to disarm the rebels, and refused to take any meaningful action to reunite Congo. Lumumba was furious. He saw it for what it was, a betrayal. The UN was not there to help him. They were there to manage the crisis on Western terms and protect Western interests. And so, with no support from the global powers who claimed to stand for peace, Lumumba made a desperate move. He turned to the Soviet Union. The Soviets agreed to help, but their assistance was limited. A few military advisors, some light equipment. It wasn't enough to turn the tide. But to the West, it didn't matter. Lumumba had crossed a red line. At the height of the Cold War, the United States saw everything through one lens. Soviet influence had to be stopped at all costs, and Lumumba's plea for help was all the justification they needed. Washington acted fast. The CIA sent in a young operative named Lawrence Devlin. He arrived in Congo under the cover of an American diplomat, just another face in a growing crowd of foreign advisors. But behind him stood Claire Timberlake, the US ambassador to Congo, and the man pulling the strings. Their mission was simple: stop Lumumba, by any means necessary. To the American officials on the ground, Lumumba was becoming a threat. Lawrence Devlin and Ambassador Claire Timberlake quickly concluded that Lumumba was too unpredictable, too independent, and dangerously close to aligning with the Soviet Union. In their eyes, he was not just a political problem. He was a Cold War liability. The decision was made. Lumumba had to be isolated. Devlin, operating with quiet precision, began working behind the scenes. He reached out to Congolese politicians, men who had personal grudges against Lumumba, rival ambitions, or simply feared his rising influence. One by one, Devlin pulled them into a silent coalition. A local web of betrayal began to form, funded and guided by the CIA. Meanwhile, unaware of how deep the plot against him already ran, Lumumba made another move. He traveled to the United States, hoping to appeal directly to Washington. He wanted support to stabilize Congo and reclaim control from the secessionists. The Soviets had offered help, but it wasn't enough. Lumumba believed he could still make a case to the West. Then, on August 26, 1960, the order came. A message from CIA Director Allen Dulles landed on Devlin's desk. It read, "If Lumumba continues to be in power, the result will be at best chaos and at worst an eventual seizure of power by the communists, with disastrous consequences for the prestige of the UN and the interests of the free world. His dismissal must therefore be an urgent and priority objective for you." Lumumba's fate was sealed. The United States had spoken. He had to go. In Washington, Allen Dulles's message was more than a memo. It was a directive. The highest levels of US power took it seriously, and with that, the full weight of the American government moved to eliminate Patrice Lumumba. On the ground in Congo, the operation accelerated. Ambassador Claire Timberlake began pressuring Congo's president, Joseph Kasavubu, urging him to dismiss Lumumba through a parliamentary vote. At the same time, CIA operative Lawrence Devlin was working in the shadows, using the politicians he had quietly recruited to weaken Lumumba's grip on power. But Devlin didn't stop at backroom deals. He went a step further, hiring agitators and staging protests. These were not peaceful demonstrations. They were designed to look spontaneous, to feel like grassroots anger. But behind the scenes, the violence was orchestrated. Anti-Lumumba mobs filled the streets, their rage bought and paid for by foreign hands. And the plan worked. On September 5, 1960, President Kasavubu made his move. He publicly dismissed Lumumba and named Joseph Ileo as the new prime minister. But Lumumba wasn't going down without a fight. He refused to step aside. Instead, he took the battle to parliament and won. Lawmakers backed him. The dismissal was overturned. For a moment, Lumumba stood tall, defiant, and still in control. But that's when the Americans realized something chilling. They couldn't remove him constitutionally. He was too strong, too determined. And so, the mission changed. Now, it wouldn't be a vote. It would be a coup. Unfortunately for Lumumba, the betrayal didn't come from across the ocean. The CIA had found its perfect pawn, Joseph Désiré Mobutu, a trusted companion of Lumumba, a man he had once stood beside. But Mobutu held power within the military and ambition in his heart. With quiet backing from the CIA and the encouragement of President Kasavubu, Mobutu made his move. On September 14, 1960, Mobutu launched a coup. Tanks rolled through the streets. The radio stations fell silent. And just like that, Congo's fragile democracy was crushed. Lumumba was arrested. A new civilian government was installed, with Justin Bomboko, another ally of the West, remaining as foreign minister. Mobutu, though unelected, became the de facto head of state. He cut diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union, China, and Czechoslovakia. The message was clear. Congo was no longer neutral. It was under Western control. But Lumumba refused to be silenced. Even under house arrest, surrounded by United Nations peacekeepers, he found a way to speak. He sent letters, wrote newspaper articles, broadcast radio messages to his supporters, and his words still carried fire. Across Congo, people rose up, demanding his release, chanting his name, calling for justice. That terrified the Americans. To them, Lumumba wasn't just a prisoner, he was still a threat. His voice alone was too dangerous. And so, a darker plan was set in motion. On September 19, 1960, CIA operative Lawrence Devlin received a classified message from headquarters. The instruction was chillingly simple: eliminate Lumumba by poison. The order had come from the highest office in the land, President Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. The message was no longer subtle. It was an execution order. Despite receiving direct orders from Washington, CIA operative Lawrence Devlin hesitated. The plan to poison Patrice Lumumba felt excessive, even to him. He believed there were other ways to neutralize the prime minister without resorting to assassination. But before any plan could be executed, Lumumba made a daring move. In the dead of night, he escaped the capital. He set out for Stanleyville, his political stronghold in the east, hoping to rally his supporters and reclaim his authority. But the journey didn't go as planned. A few days later, in the province of Kasai, he was captured. Soldiers loyal to Mobutu arrested him, beat him severely, and flew him back to Leopoldville. From there, he was transferred to the Thysville military camp, isolated, bruised, but still defiant. Meanwhile, there was hope, brief and fragile. A Ghanaian contingent of UN peacekeepers was prepared to rescue Lumumba. They had a plan, the will, the men. But the order to proceed never came. Under pressure from the United States, the UN Secretary General refused to authorize the mission. The chance to save Lumumba slipped through the cracks of international diplomacy, deliberately. With poison now off the table, the US pivoted to a new strategy, one that was colder, more detached. Let the Congolese take care of the Congolese. In other words, let the army do the dirty work. Then, on January 13, 1961, something unexpected happened. The Thysville camp erupted in mutiny. Congolese soldiers, still loyal to Lumumba, freed him. They pledged themselves to him and prepared to protect him at all costs. But the celebration was short-lived. The CIA quickly alerted Mobutu. Within hours, he flew into the camp, reasserted control, and ordered Lumumba's rearrest. But this time, Mobutu had something darker in mind. He had Lumumba flown to Katanga, the breakaway province led by his most bitter enemy, Moise Tshombe. On January 17, 1961, Lumumba was seen arriving on the tarmac in Katanga, his face swollen, his body battered, surrounded by soldiers who had no orders to protect, but to punish. It was a silent arrival, but what followed would echo for generations. That same day, January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba met the full force of betrayal. In a dimly lit room in Katanga, Moise Tshombe and his Belgian accomplices took turns beating him for hours. It wasn't just murder, it was vengeance. By the time they were done, Tshombe was soaked in Lumumba's blood. Then, under the cover of night, they drove Lumumba and two of his closest allies to a remote clearing. There were no trials, no witnesses, no mercy. They were executed. Afterwards, their bodies were doused in sulfuric acid, dissolved beyond recognition. The goal was simple: to erase them, to leave no grave, no symbol, no shrine for future resistance. But history remembers. All that survived of Lumumba's body was a single tooth, stolen by a Belgian policeman as a trophy. That tooth would remain hidden for decades. Lumumba's family didn't even know it existed until the year 2000, when the same policeman went on television and held it up for the camera, bragging as he described how he dissolved the prime minister's body in acid. It wasn't until 2022, over 60 years later, that the tooth was finally returned to Lumumba's family. But by then, the damage was done. In the aftermath of Lumumba's assassination, Congo descended into chaos. Civil war, infighting. 4 brutal years of instability followed, until Joseph Mobutu, backed by the United States and the United Nations, seized full control. Mobutu would go on to rule for over 3 decades. His regime became one of the most corrupt and authoritarian in African history, funded, armed, and politically protected by the very nations that once preached democracy and freedom. So not only did the West help destroy one of Africa's most promising leaders, they helped install one of its worst. Belgium has since admitted it bears moral responsibility for the events that led to Lumumba's death. But no one, no official, no politician, has ever faced prosecution. And as we said earlier, the last living suspect, Etienne d'Avignon, is now 92 years old. The clock is ticking, and once again, justice may escape into the grave. What do you think? Was this justice delayed or justice denied forever? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe this story deserves to be heard, like this video, leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Lumumba may be gone, but his voice still echoes.